Okay, we are now recording. Welcome everyone to the February 11th, 2020 iteration of the MicroProfile live Hangout. This is a off-week meeting where we're going to be discussing the working group solution for MicroProfile. It is everyone's shared responsibility to take notes. A link to the notes is in the chat. And again, please, this is an important discussion and we need to capture notes. And I try, but just leaving it all on me is not a good idea. Also, the chat will also be saved and put up to the YouTube video. So just an FYI that the chat will also be recorded, quote unquote. Okay, I don't think I've missed anyone. Oh, is everyone shared? Oh, when you go to the meeting notes, make sure you put your name and optionally the organization that you're representing or that you're with in the meeting notes. Okay, so where to begin? I'm going to throw out an idea. We kind of discussed last week, and we have David. Hey, David, you're like my twin, man. Okay, sorry. John, stay on topic. Where we talked a little bit about last week, there was two aspects. One is, should specs graduate, I'm going to use that word, I don't know if it's the right word, from MicroProfile and DigiKarta, right? That was one thing that we talked about. And the second is, a consequence of that, perhaps, is should the namespace change? And as a part of that, from org.eclipse.microprofile to, for example, Jakarta. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last week. And the idea of graduating specs out of MicroProfile into Jakarta, I actually don't prefer that as an option. I like the LTS idea, where we can continue to iterate specs quickly in MicroProfile, providing an option for spec writers. Now, if the spec committee decides they want to do that, I mean, I don't know if there's anything that, you know, we can kind of do to stop that. And that sounds awfully dictatorship. I don't mean it to sound that way, right? But I like the idea of continuing to innovate these specs within MicroProfile, and it does provide spec authors different approaches, one via the Jakarta process and community, and one via MicroProfile, which kind of has a different approach. And part of the reason why I believe this, and you've seen me say it a couple of times probably now, is I don't necessarily believe that all paths lead to Jakarta. It's a path. Right. So one of the things I like about, you know, MicroProfile, and I'm becoming more and more open to this idea of not even having a MicroProfile platform spec. It just, you know, again, I use the RFC example, just a bunch of specs, and that might be interrelated. So letting other non-Jakarta kind of projects potentially pick up MicroProfile specs and use them, I think, is part of that reason. I want to kind of continue to encourage that. So I'll pause. I've been talking for a little bit, and I don't know if anyone else kind of wants to comment on my comment.
Let me just jump in. I kind of agree with what you're saying, John. One thing I want to remind people of, if they weren't around, well, if they were around, I'm reminding them if they weren't around back in 2016, that's kind of filling you in. But when we kicked off MicroProfile, you know, we always said at some point when we think some specs or whatever these things are get to a point where we do want to donate them to a proper, in quotes, standards body, then we would consider that on a per case basis, and JCP might be one of those that we might want to go to, but it might not be. There could be other ones. So I would definitely not want to mandate that at some point a spec has to suddenly graduate to Jakarta. Maybe I'm reading more into what you were saying, John, but I think if a spec and the group around that spec within MicroProfile decide at some point they want to, just move all innovation and change the package names and whatever and go to Jakarta, then that's fine. We should embrace that if the community is behind it. Absolutely, we shouldn't stand in the way. But I don't think it should be a requirement that at some point, whether it's arbitrary or not, it all just goes to Jakarta. So I got other things I could say, but that's probably the pertinent one at the moment.
Yeah, it should not mandatory graduate, but I would like to turn it around that, for instance, if Jakarta or one of the Jakarta projects says, oh, I like to use config 1.4 because it seems stable enough, it seems usable enough, and we like to use it because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That is an option, and that is a good thing. But the issue that I see then is that, for instance, after a few months, 6 months later or whatever, then we have config 2.0. And what with all those runtimes, and there are already a bunch of runtimes that support Jakarta and MicroProfile in the same runtime. How can you combine the 1.4 and the 2.0 easily? Okay, there are solutions like Open Liberty is probably with these modules can do that more easily, but how is it easy to support them both in the case that you say that LTS version is now there at Jakarta, the 1.4, and the development goes on with the 2.0.
So for that, I don't think it's a bigger problem, because even if, for example, GNoSQL use the MicroProfile config, it does not directly expose the API. It should use internally. It said, okay, I define this configuration. Yes, and the user, you can define this configuration, and then the GNoSQL can automatically honor it. And without this kind of API directly exposed, the end user will not, be affected. So the runtime should be able to cope with it. Yeah. Runtime could consume a config 2.0, as long as they can comply with the GNoSQL's TCKs and etc. I don't think changing config from 1.4 to 2.0 will place any barriers.
Except because the 2.0 is a breaking change. That means that the GNoSQL, which has compiled against 1.4, will probably not run against the 2.0.
But if a GNoSQL depend on 1.4, it says, okay, depend on 1.4, obviously GNoSQL will need to, even if it's not a MicroProfile config in the MicroProfile, if it's in the Jakarta EE, if GNoSQL saying, okay, I need to consume the latest config, it has to do a release and etc. And to say, okay, move up my level of dependency. That's the kind of similar thing for other specs like JSF depend on CDI. When JSF say, okay, I want to consume the new CDI, JSF will have to make a minor update to see that. And this is nothing new, like CDI depend on annotation, and lately annotation made a mistake and then change, and then CDI do more change.
But within Java EE, you have completely backwards compatibility, which you do not have within MicroProfile. So that means CDI from 1.2 to 2.0 was completely backwards compatible. That will not be the case with config 1.4 to versus.
So I think this is the crux of I think the question or the point, or however you want to look at it, right, is how the two projects see compatibility, right? Where config is roughly 3 years old. I don't have an exact number. 3.5 years old. And it's looking to do a backwards incompatible change, where Jakarta tends to go much longer than that, typically. And so this is one of the one of the ideas behind that was an LTS release, right? Maybe there's a way to try and have a stable API that Jakarta can pull from, while MicroProfile feels a little bit more free to break compatibility.
Well, you know, the moment that there is a Jakarta release that points to a bunch of MicroProfile artifacts, and MicroProfile points to Jakarta artifacts, and they go, you know, over time, any inconsistencies between how they're managed are gonna have to get eliminated. And they will be effectively the same type of effort, just in different namespaces.
I think is
I mean,
we should.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean you carry on when you finish.
I was just gonna say, I mean, like we could tell ourselves we want to offer more flexibility on one side of the fence versus the other, but the second that they're bi-directionally referring to each other, they'll homogenize in how they're managed, inevitably, right?
Okay. I think is again, I would like to say is like let's move MicroProfile. I mean, stamp away from the config. Let's think about config is in Jakarta. Is kind of the there's even if config in Jakarta, there's no is kind of you still have this kind of inter relationships. Like config depend on CDI, and then CDI depend on injection, and some other JSF depend on CDI. Maybe JSF will depend on config one day. So this kind of relationship and management is kind of has been around for ages. So we need to monitor it, and I still think we can manage it. So think about if GNOSQL use config, we declare config tool with the long-term release, right? LTS. And then GNOSQL is kind of happy with the config tool. And that's enough functionality for GNOSQL. Maybe GNOSQL will stay with config 2.0 for years, and then it's config can continue innovate and etc. However, if we declare the LTS for the APIs live in this config 2.0, we need to make sure it will not get removed. So make sure this is backward compatible. In this way, I think we are going to be okay.
I didn't say we wouldn't be okay. I would just say that they will become the same. They would be managed the same way over time. You know.
Yeah, the relationship. Yeah, it is.
You know, whatever practice happens on one side of the fence will have to happen on the other side of the fence for it to be survivable. So if MicroProfile does LTS releases, we're going to do LTS releases on the Jakarta side of the fence, and it will be human nature. If the world finds the relationship between MicroProfile and Jakarta EE to be confusing now and is craving some consistency, when they're bidirectionally dependent upon each other, the world will demand more consistency. And, you know, they'll just be split namespaces at that point.
So Emily, I had one question about what you said. If from your example, if you're saying, for instance, if a config 2.0 became an LTS, you mentioned something around making sure we didn't do backward incompatible changes. Were you talking about config in the 2.x stream, or were you saying we couldn't make backward incompatible changes for 3.0 of config if we wanted to for MicroProfile?
No, I mean is for example in the config tool we have this all this method, right, living in config tool, and then we innovate, add a few more methods, and later on get them deleted. And then we might release config 3.0, but 3.0 could be like we deleted something introduced in the config 2.1. But we remain our own right not to declare config 3.0 as LTS. And then like later on, we config 4.0 declare as LTS, and then kind of we take on what we have innovated since 2.0 and 4.0 and put a stamp. And then we say, okay, we are going to sue these APIs, and then we can innovate afterwards. Again, like we give us a 1 year time or 2 year time to innovate in the unknown spaces.
I think the short version is that what's being proposed is that every LTS release cannot be backwards incompatible from the previous LTS release. And so therefore the answer to your question, Ken, would be, if you break something, you got to unbreak it as soon as you do another LTS release.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very good from my perspective, because it kind of means that whatever innovation you might end up doing can't be applied to future LTSs because you're tied into that previous LTS.
Well, that's why I say as soon as they're bidirectionally dependent upon each other, they're both going to be effectively the same community, the same management structure.
Well, so
Well,
last
the
week,
reality is you have a fork at that point, really. You have an LTS stream and you have the innovation stream.
Right, but you can't merge the innovation stream back into the LTS stream because it's backwards incompatible, right? So
I guess to a certain extent that depends on what we mean by LTS. LTS could mean no backwards back breaking changes, or it could just mean that we don't break things in that one LTS stream, but a future LTS stream doesn't have to be backwards compatible with the old one.
okay, now if we follow that, okay, right now, when there is a stable Jakarta E release and a breaking change MicroProfile release, we have proven over 4 years we can handle that because nothing on the Jakarta side of the fence is referencing these things and therefore is not broken by the changes. And we tell the user, we're sorry, but you have to digest the breaking change. Now, I haven't finished.
Okay.
In the future, though, we're painting this scenario where, let's say JNoSQL is part of the EE platform, and as Emily stated, they never upgrade beyond 2.0 because they don't want to be broken and they don't need anything, and so now we're happy and lucky. Or are we? Because how do I include, as a vendor, 2.0 of config and the future 3.0 of config, which is incompatible with 2.0, in the same binary? I can't. So now, instead of splitting things cleanly by namespace, I have to have a distribution that's stable and includes the 2.0, and I have to have a separate distribution that includes 3.0. So instead of forking the namespace, now I have to have 2 binaries. Or someone's got some magic stuff that allows two completely conflicting versions of a class to exist in the same product because of some fancy class loader stuff. And now we're in OSGI land and I just want to shoot myself.
So I think is for what you outlined here, I think there's 2 things. The first thing, we could make all the LTS backward compatible, like backward compatible. The other thing is because it's even if NoSQL depend on CDI, however, it does not directly expose the API. The runtime can go extra miles to make sure NoSQL works with any long LTS like a config LTS. So because end user is not affected, It's just a runtime. We haven't got many versions of the runtime. I don't foresee any kind of bigger difficulties and etc. for the handful runtimes to go extra miles to do something for the end user.
Okay, so let me jump in here. Last week I was a little bit lost with this. To me, it sounds, when we discuss this, it sounds easier than it is applicable. John said something about that I agree, and I think Mark also interjected on that, about no one said, why would we make MicroProfile the next Java EE that is rebranded into Jakarta? If we want adaptability.
Hold on. It wouldn't be mandatory.
Yeah, hold on. But there is a level of flexibility. We're not going to demand things, but there is a level of flexibility should be, when flexibility is added, there is on that with communication and lowering the clarity of what it means to have this flexibility. What are the concessions? I don't think we are in a position where we are going to own such a level of clarity, because communication is complicated, and the level that it is much more complicated to keep something simple. Every single time we provide extra flexibility for a project to utilize MicroProfile, and we make the concessions, and instead of the project using what is currently is, as they can send PRs and say, hey, it would be nice that you have this feature. What about X? If we're talking about 100 projects that are not included in the Jakarta space, that are maybe Apache, they are in the, in Linux, we want to be used by any project in the ecosystem that is software. We want to not cater just one group. I think we continue to forget, and though the conversation is so nice, I continue to be mesmerized, like confused. Why are we so willing to sacrifice or be pulled into something that we shouldn't have anything special for a particular project? We should be neutral onto adding value to any user, any contributor that wants to have something to do with MicroProfile. So this is where I am at the moment, and I'm so confused. When we do X, why are we doing X?
Slow down.
And that is me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I learned anything concrete from that.
Yeah, it's just, I want to know what is the concessions and what is the flexibility, and are we communicated it clearly should we decide to do so? And why, when we cater to something, why do we do X? And someone else will come and request the same thing. Are we willing to scale into such a level without favoritism? I don't like favoritism. I have nothing against anyone, but I like the project.
I'm still not learning anything concrete from anything you're saying. So I appreciate your attempt to.
Yes,
but I'm not getting anything from it. So anyway, the audience that we are catering to are the people who want to run fast, break stuff, and dig into the cutting edge. That's been my understanding, right? And every market innovation that comes out, as I gave in the email, like let's say, for example, Graal had some non-compliant stuff that it likes to offer for native compilation, and it's not quite up to, perfectly compliant status. Are we the kind of community that digs into that and tries to squeeze every bit of innovation out of everything that's the latest and greatest? My understanding is that's who we are. And so, that is the audience, the people who we're trying to attract, the people who want to be on the cutting edge.
Yeah, okay.
And there's some standards-ish kind of things that we attempt to do for a little bit of portability, but ultimately we're leaning into, run fast and break stuff and dig into the latest innovations of the industry.
If you say that is the goal of MicroProfile, which is fine, you can say that as a goal, there's nothing wrong with it, but then you exclude that some projects like Jakarta will ever use your specifications, because
Correct.
you cannot cope, they cannot cope with that. So that means that they will simply reinvented again tconfig, because now it is easier as before. So you will end up with 2-3 times the same thing in the Java ecosystem, which is also not a good thing.
Well, I don't know about
So,
2-3 times the same thing, but you're correct in the sense that, you know, the second that something is adopted by a community that has not those goals, they have the goals of stability and future compliance and not backwards incompatible changes, you know, obviously that changes the rules on the MicroProfile side of the fence if we want to cater to that, right? And so I really think it kind of comes down to the fact that we're either going to slow down and make less backwards compatible changes and stabilize, and therefore Jakarta EE can use MicroProfile in the MicroProfile namespace, and they over time become overwhelmingly managed the same way, or we strategically move things over into a different package when they're stable, so we have a clear way of communicating to the market. Now, the LTS concept that the JVM has does involve a package change. So I appreciate everyone wanting to avoid the package change, but I'm super concerned about us introducing a new LTS concept that isn't industry understood without a clear package change. Like the reason that the JVM LTS works is because all the crazy stuff they put into a different package. So nobody can be ignorant and accidentally use this stuff. And they learned the lesson with with unsafe, right? So it's a pretty stable lesson to learn. You know, anyway, so I'll back up and let people chime in. But.
So I'm going to bring up something and maybe pull Scott in here, because I know Scott brought up, and I don't mean to catch you off guard, Scott, but you were bringing up, you know, maybe what we effectively have is a fork, right? By design, where we, you know, Jakarta can pull in, you know, MicroProfile 1.4, let's say, config 1.4, let's say. And then we keep going, we break compatibility in 2. We keep moving along, doing, you know, working however we do it. And it might be that Jakarta config, which has 1.4, pulls in ideas, maybe even coded implementation into the Jakarta namespace, the features that they think bring stability, but not necessarily backwards compatibility. Maybe they sync with a MicroProfile config 4.0, right, is another sync point when they're ready to do backwards compatibility. In that use case, it really would be a fork.
Well, I think it has to be managed as a fork regardless, because as David said, you basically have 2 streams where one's running out ahead of each other, and you have to have a reconciliation when you merge or attempt to update features that have been created in the future-looking specifications. And I mean, I think Emily was, I'm sorry, Amelia was making a valid point. Is, I mean, to me, the issue is there seems to be an assumption that just because we consume Java, Jakarta APIs at the core, that relationship needs to be bidirectional. I mean, to her point, if we are just running a project that's related to microservices, cloud native Java, and a particular set of APIs consumable by arbitrary people, it's really up to the consumers to reconcile how that project moves forward, and Jakarta is only one of them. So whether or not they do maintain an LTS branch of existing projects or fork it into a Jakarta namespace is up to them. It's really not our concern, and I don't think we should be concerned about it either. Frankly, if that's the discussion we're having, and we're talking along the lines of what David's saying, either the discussion needs to be either this needs to move into Jakarta, or it needs to be a separate project and stop worrying about, you know, this perceived competition.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah.
Scott,
Hold
you
on. I would
nailed
like.
it. Let me follow this out, because the rule one of open source is that it is up to the user to make the most value of it. We create it, we take in feedback, we choose what feedback to use and implement, right? The community that is behind a project. No matter where the project is housed, it shouldn't deviate to any particular project itself and gravitate as the moon and the earth. I am against anything that will lead MicroProfile to that moon and earth. We should be neutral. When we say a concession is happening to a project, it should be the same concession that will happen to any project in any community. Any favoritism to Jakarta needs to be stated, and is that scalable? Because I do not agree that a healthy community and a healthy ecosystem that we have maintained in MicroProfile can be maintained in the future. Should we cut and just decide to do X because we are being pushed or because we feel that we owe it? Do we really owe it? Is that the question that we need to ask?
Can I get some words in there?
Better to have more, diverse users, same users. I don't freaking care. What I'm talking about is differentiation and having more options is healthy for our community. MicroProfile is about innovation. Jakarta is about stability. Some of the clients that we support cater to both. Why do we need to take away an option, right? Why shouldn't we enhance different environments and participate and be happy about it? This thing about pushing for unity is so bothersome because it shows that we need to or submit or be a part of something, but do we need to? I think there's so much wealth and health on having this diversity that welcomes those that might not see value on something to something else. And I believe that we should do a better job of understanding what we have achieved of the project, understand what is being said by some, and then see where do we stand? Is this what we want for the next 5 years? Or is MicroProfile the next Java EE?
Okay, I wanted to make a point off of Scott's comment, and I'm barely remembering what it is.
I went in. Go ahead.
Ties back to the namespace, and you kind of made the comment of whatever they do with it is up to them. Anyway, I made this point last time, and I'll make it again. And so someone stop sharing the minutes, so maybe we can put those back up.
That was me because nobody was taking minutes.
Oh no, people were writing in there. There was some people.
Oh yeah, people are. I'm just not refreshing.
Okay.
We're trying.
Anyway, so
Let me go back.
Hibernate, for example, has very successfully implemented JPA while continuing to innovate the persistence space via its own APIs. And I really think that was a successful model. And if we have a stable stream of an API under the Jakarta namespace and it's backwards compatible and has those concerns, and we're able to have our sort of, let's call it shared Hibernate package under the MicroProfile package where we're making backwards incompatible changes, but I can ship both, and I maybe even find ways to support both at the same implementation. And when people propose backwards incompatible changes to the MicroProfile config, I'm implementing, I see that in my brain as the relationship of Hibernate to JPA. Hibernate can make all the backwards incompatible changes it would like. It can do all the innovation for persistence it would like. And the long-term relationship is that good, proven things that happen and say in Hibernate could in the future move into JPA. Does not in any way diminish Hibernate's ability to continue to innovate. Where we have lacked in the industry is we have no sort of collective Hibernate. We've innovated in our implementations under our own packages, and we've tried things out individually and then brought them to the center once we thought they were ready. But then at that point, we're kind of convincing each other or talking to each other for the first time together. And that's like the first time we would ever look at an idea. And it usually in practice would take a year at least for other vendors to gain some confidence with the idea. And so the overall pace that we could shovel innovation from our implementations into the standard package, I think was slow. And one of the things that I like about MicroProfile is that we have the ability to kind of innovate together from the beginning. And that does involve us being able to backwards and compatibly change things, but I don't see a big problem with there being a standard flavor of the same innovations under a different package, because in practice, we've been able to handle that just fine with, like I say, there's almost a one-for-one Hibernate interface for everything that there is a JPA interface, and it hasn't been a problem. And since they're in different packages, we're able to digest it. Seems like we've been doing this well for the last 20 years.
David, let me translate your idea into example. For example, in June, we have a config 2.0 release. Like we just have done all the APIs and etc. And then we declare this kind of like a long-term release. And then we continue innovate, added new packages and do not like put the new APIs in the existing package. So put them into kind of a different package, like a differentiate. This is the newly added and might disappear soon, and etc. Is this what your suggestion? Basically, we continue innovate, but in a different namespace.
Well, that's the clearest. And when I say different namespace, I don't mean like, there's org, Eclipse, MicroProfile, config, and that's stable, and then org, Eclipse, MicroProfile, config dot fancy, which is the innovative namespace. I mean, like, just a very clear different namespace. Anyway, like I said, that's we have 20 years of success individually innovating in our own namespaces and migrating stable things to the center. What we haven't really tried until MicroProfile is kind of innovating in a collective namespace.
So let me just ask something, because it seems to me, I get what you're getting at, David, but it seems to me that you're suggesting more of a push model. Surely we should be just saying, if anybody wants to do this, let them pull. We do the work in MicroProfile. It's up to MicroProfile to innovate the way MicroProfile wants. And if anybody comes along, whether it's Jakarta or CNCF or whatever else, they can pull any of the stuff at any point. And if they want to change the namespace, then they can do that. But it's not for MicroProfile to say when you take something or what you change it to.
Yes. Mark, you hit the nail. It's up to the user.
Okay, hold on. Let me respond.
Yeah.
I agree. The implication on the Jakarta side of the fence, which is not our decision to make, and I understand that point, is that if they do not change the namespace, then Jakarta is signing up for all the backwards and compatible changes that we make without complaint. And I'm okay with that, but I just, if I put my Jakarta hat on them, I would probably recommend we change the namespace, because
not necessarily. I mean, they could say, we're taking, config 1.3, we're keeping the package names as they are, let's just say, and we only ever support 1.3 for the next 5 years. Regardless of what happens in MicroProfile, they don't have to track anything else at that point. It's still a fork, but they're just not changing the names. Granted, it could be slightly confusing. And yeah, if you put MicroProfile and Jakarta implementations together, it's going to be a pain in the ass. But again, that's more for them to figure out. It's not for us.
I think it's yeah, for this a pull and a push model. I think is with this kind of signal long-term release, at least long-term LTS. At least we signal actually, hi, hello everybody. This is a great release. We have we have tested and etc. I mean, have gone through a few years experiment and etc. And then you are free to take in. I think at least we kind of make this announcement is that yeah, this is a good release to be consumed. I think is we have done as far as that. I think is good to be like shared and consumed.
I guess my question is, why would we need to declare an LTS? I mean, if we think about like what Mark just said, I mean, some external organization has decided that they like what's in config 1.3 or config 1.4. Well, great, go ahead and use it.
But you're signing up for all the changes that we make, which some of may be backwards incompatible without warning.
Right.
Or you could say, or they could say, you know, we'll fork it and we'll change the package space. Sure. Again, it's entirely up to them. It's like, I mean, using your Hibernate analogy, you know, a lot of JPA was based on Hibernate. All right, regardless of what IBM might think. So we, you know, the whole effort was to change the namespace and standardize it, but you know, they could have kept the same namespace, but then it would have been tracking Hibernate and all the changes that it made over the next 15 years. So it's for them to figure it out, and there are good reasons why they perhaps should go down one road rather than another. But I don't think that it's for MicroProfile to say, now is the time you should fork if anybody wants to fork.
Right.
Yeah.
So
figure it out yourself.
Mark, you totally have it.
Okay.
So, correct.
Go ahead, Emily, and then I'll try.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think is to play a good ecosystem. It's good to give them some indication this is a good stable release. Let's take a Hibernate for example. Even Hibernate this back is kind of comply with JPA. So all the JPA APIs is kept with the Hibernate releases all the time, right? Hibernate comply with the JPA. So you can say, okay, whatever Hibernate release from 1 to 90, right? This 1 to 90 for the JPA packages and etc. is always backward compatible.
I don't think so. So I'm gonna echo what you said, Mark, and just so I can make sure that I'm on the same page of what you're thinking. I think I am. Basically, what you're saying is that we don't need to change the way we operate. It's not our job to provide avenues of stability in the MicroProfile in any way. It's the consumer who needs to make the choice, and therefore this entire conversation is basically over. On the Jakarta side of the fence, there's a conversation that has to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's one option.
Right.
Another way to think of it would be like, I know we did fault tolerance based on a few other things, but you know, Netflix OSS was one of the more popular ones at the time. We could have decided, looking at whatever version of, you know, the sub-project in Netflix OSS that we wanted to use, that's the API we want to use, and we just make a fork of that. Obviously, we might have some IP issues using the Netflix package name, but you know, go with this example as far as it makes sense. And that's again up to us to do that. It's not for Netflix to define this as a stable one or not a stable one.
Right. I'm okay with that. I mean, if basically this conversation is to be continued just on the other side of the fence at a point where it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. But then we should also put out the message already today that people should not combine Jakarta EE and MicroProfile things, and all those runtimes where they are combined should be avoided, because in the future it will give you serious troubles.
Well, isn't that your choice as a vendor to combine them, and your choice as a consumer to consume that?
Yeah.
Yes, correct. But we, as a lot of vendors, are doing that. So that then we should immediately stop with that.
Why?
Because it will give issues later on in a few years.
Why will it?
Yes, because we just say that MicroProfile will go his own way, look at no one, do his own thing, which, okay, as an open source model, that's a perfectly thing to do. But then that means that what we are now today trying to do, that we need to stop it immediately, because we will trick the users and we will trick them into something which will not work in the future, and they will need to start over again with their application.
No, hold on. Can I back up? At what point in time did we make a commitment to the outside world that code in MicroProfile was backwards compatible always? And when did we make the commitment that you will not run into issues in future MicroProfile releases?
I'm not saying about backwards compatibility of MicroProfile itself. That was for everyone clear that you have break and change. But if at a certain point Jakarta specifications are consuming anything about MicroProfile, that will be a fork, and that the combination that we have today in at least 5 runtimes will no longer work, as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting.
I don't think that's up to MicroProfile to make announcements about that, because some vendors may want to go to the effort to make both work and others may not. That's up to individual vendors as to what they do.
Yeah, so let me ask.
It should be clear for those vendors if we decided for the MicroProfile thing today.
But it has been clear. For instance, let me say, in Tommy Tribe, we support different softwares, and some of them are open source. So there is a flavor of Tommy MicroProfile. That is not, Tommy has different flavors, like 6. And that one of them is Jakarta flavor. But it's not the same as the one.
They're all Jakarta flavor, but yes.
Well, so you see what I mean? So I'm talking about Tommy Tribe, we cater to our clients, their needs. And it gets very customized to what we see, because we get direct loop from the user, the paying user that chooses to work with us. I imagine it is the same for IBM, Red Hat, Fujitsu. We internally, it is our job to bring some of what we learned to the project itself. That means MicroProfile, so that as it goes, it's applicable and beneficial to everyone, right? But you see, there is a retrospective that goes in, and though Tommy Tribe and IBM, we have an impact into the project itself, we don't dictate our users' value to it. We cater to them because they pay us. So I am saying open source is a discipline. It has discipline not only to the creator, but also to the user, right? We don't want to be the next Equifax and whatever things like that happens. Security is important to us, right? So when, Rudy, you say this will be a problem, it has never been a problem, because we have started MicroProfile with that in mind, right?
Well, okay, hold on. So let me do this shorter. So far, Mark Little's comments are that we have the ability to continue as we originated down the path of making backward and compatible changes, and it's a stay the course statement, and that it's up to the consuming side to decide how they want to consume, and no one would be upset if that was under a different package. Is that a fair recap?
It is, but I want to add this. I think what I'm proposing also scales a little bit better, the pull model rather than the push, because I'm not assuming that Jakarta is the only thing that might want to consume one or more of our specs.
Sure.
And we should not be in the position to state something is LTS and not. There could be some other group out there that actually likes, config 1.3, let's say, even though we don't think it's LTS, that's the one they want to take.
Right.
And they'll take it. And our licenses won't prevent that. And that's great. That's allowing us to seed more communities with the pull.
We have already
hold on. I was trying to get to a point. So then that gets back to Rudy, your comment, which is now everything's different. But I understand everything to be the same. It's just the conversation on how Jakarta EE can consume these things. That conversation has to now happen at the Jakarta EE side of the fence, but it hasn't happened yet. So there is no statement to make that all of these things are now changed. In fact, the only statement to make is this is not the right place to have the conversation if we continue down our current path.
Yeah,
If I may,
if I may add to
sorry,
that, because I
go
have
ahead,
one
Martin.
question. Basically, Jakarta is a special case for us because from MicroProfile perspective, we are consuming Jakarta artifacts. So if Jakarta NoSQL is going to fork config, it doesn't matter for us, but what if CDI or JAX-RS forks it? And eventually MicroProfile wants to move on the CDI version of Jakarta next.
We could fork.
Yeah, just like Jakarta could fork our stuff, we could fork their stuff if they're going in a direction that we don't like.
I'm not necessarily so much of a fan of that, but you know, it would be a discussion. I would not be.
It could even just be as simple a fork as saying we make CDI work with our version of config. It could be just as simple as that, and everything else is the same as Jakarta.
Well, let's keep the topic on.
Yeah,
how
exactly.
And I don't want to be fork happy here. I'm kind of hungry though.
Hold on. Let me just make a clear statement so my head doesn't explode. I can get my head around the concept that we simply stay the course on this side of the fence, and the stability problem moves over to Jakarta because Jakarta is really the only place. We probably made a misstep by even starting the conversation here, because ultimately the stability constraints of Jakarta are up to Jakarta to solve, and we're not enabling the right conversation with the right people solving them here. They really should be solved over there. So I totally get your point, Mark. And I tend to favor it because the same outcome can happen as we stabilize on different packages. The stabilizing community is the one that has to have that conversation.
Exactly.
You know,
I am plus one.
I do get real nervous when we start talking about how to stabilize MicroProfile, because all roads lead to it not being MicroProfile anymore.
I know, it confuses the hell out of me. Am I biased here? I'm confused for two calls now.
So you've convinced me, just for the record, but I would love to hear from other people's. We all want to hear other people's perspectives.
Can I ask a quick question here? For Jakarta, I know in JCP, we kind of does not allow backward incompatible changes. Has this same issue been discussed in Jakarta? Was that set in stone? It's like,
is that something we need to discuss though? That's kind of
well, it's something that so I'm sensitive to the fact that this is not the Jakarta EE community, and it isn't really the right place to make decisions on what is right for Jakarta EE.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that Emily, if you have a question like that, send it to the forum for the Jakarta. One of the things that I have noticed is the lack some level of disrespect to different communities, even though some of the same people are allowed in it. And one of the things that I detest the most is private hangouts where one group chooses to push their agenda into another project. This I have seen. I even sent a message to the Jakarta Community Forum not like 2 weeks ago while traveling. Personally, I'm not going to join a private call and discuss anything about Jakarta privately. We have the space and we have the community.
Let's get minutes on namespace.
Yeah.
So sorry, this is I forgot to do my 5-minute.
Exactly. Let's get
warning,
focused. So I like the idea of stay the course, because I do believe it is very vitally important to the industry that we have a place where we can innovate and break stuff. You know, move fast and break crap. You know, if we lose the move fast and break crap aspect of MicroProfile, it's not interesting to me anymore. You know, I'm not interested in just simply having two brands for the sake of having two brands. There's got to be a good reason for it, you know. Now, that does mean there has to be a conversation on the Jakarta side of the fence on how things are going to get consumed. For the record, I would recommend we change the package, but hey, that's something we have to talk about on the Jakarta EE side of the fence. And also when and how and all those things. But I'm satisfied with that outcome if everyone is satisfied with that outcome.
Well, so that's the next question, is how is there a decision made on this? Because basically the takeaway from that outcome is that we need to focus on a microprofile working group.
Yeah, and that's something that we need to do.
Yeah, well, we knew we needed to do that anyway, but in terms of the technical alignment, the prevailing perspective is stay the course, right? Continue to move fast and break things.
I think the answer to the technical alignment is there is no alignment. It's up to Jakarta to decide what it wants to do with anything from MP if it wants to.
Yes, and that is for any project,
Well,
not only Jakarta.
I think it should be stated that no one would be upset if there was a Jakarta config, and it would be reasonable.
Isn't that a compliment to the projects acquiring each other and being responsible for their growth? I think that is usability and open source best practices. And I like what we are kind of ending on. John?
The question to the community, though, is how are we making that decision? I mean, we don't have a real formal voting process, so the issue is, how are we going to record this decision? I don't feel that this is sufficient
Coverage, right?
Oh.
Yeah, I agree. So go
sorry,
ahead,
I'm going to step in. There's two things here. First, no matter what, I'd want to stew on this a little bit, right, and get some feedback from people that watch and stuff.
Absolutely.
We've generally stated, that these kind of decisions are made at the live Hangout, and if you want to be at the live Hangout, and it's in essence, it's like our steering committee, right? You know, we've long said be at that meeting if you want to vote on something, right? With that being said, on the working group issue, I don't know if we, I think of that from a technical alignment issue. Yes. On the technical alignment issue, typically what we do is we try to, like we're doing here, get to some kind of consensus in the live Hangout. And if you don't attend the live Hangout, then, hey man, that's the way we've been rolling for 3 to 4 years.
And it works.
Yeah,
it's been working.
I think if I remember correctly, like we make the decision in the live Hangout, and then someone will send to the mailing list, and people can directly voice. I mean,
right. That's correct, but I do think, given the severity of this decision, then socializing it on the list for a week and maybe formalizing more a bit next week, I think is a reasonable.
So
we get people agree or disagree? Just curious on those thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea because we talked about a lot on the mailing list.
And, we said we gave ourselves in December a soft deadline to be February 28th.
Well, that's the working group thing. So we don't want to open that before we firmly close that we're going to flush out the proposal that seems to coalesce, which is stay the course, but also it's totally cool for Jakarta to consume under a different package and pursue a stable path with the concepts.
Not only Jakarta, but any other project.
Anybody, right? But
we will send that a message.
But we seem to coalesce on the idea we don't favor complicated stability paths, because that's really not what MicroProfile is about. Yep.
So we have the next community call next week. Who will own that message today or tomorrow? And then we can circulate it next week and just move forward.
So next week, sorry, I do want to point this out, and yes, we are over. It's Dev Nexus next week. I'll actually be in
I'm
New
gonna be
York.
there.
We are all traveling. So we make it for another 2 weeks because most of us will be traveling. In some can, we'll hold it, and the talk can continue to go. But if we are required at the call to decide, then we have an issue.
Alternatively, we say our votes in the mailing list, and we have the meeting next week anyway.
Yeah, I'm +1 on that one. It should be scalable. It shouldn't require, cutting.
Okay. People are dropping. We got 29 people. People are dropping. So,
All right.
Let's flush it. So who's going to take the action items, flush it out to the list? The stay the course proposal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I will.
We love you. We love you. We appreciate you. We show up.
We'll make sure to punish you for it.
Yeah,
I
I'll
will
say
get
it's
to the
David's
beer.
idea.
That
And
beer.
then
Next week.
I'm just a messenger. Okay, so yeah, I'll feel free to make adjustments to my wording and stuff in the mailing list, but I'll push this out. I got a bit of stuff to do here. I got to push out this recording. I may listen to it again and compare it to the notes, make sure we've captured some important stuff, and then I'll probably push something out. I'll try and get that done by tomorrow.
Yeah, and add the video to the message, John, because it's 1 hour and it's so helpful. When you tweet it, add MicroProfile so we retweet it, and then just go on. It's awesome.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see everyone. Same bat channel, same bat time and channel next week. Well, okay, not me, but everybody else.
See you next Wednesday, everyone. Those
Yes.
ones flying.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.